For a long time, we expected companies to take care of us. Today, we C2C, cost to company.
Right.
You're a cost to company. I mean, let that settle for a moment.
Right.
They owe you nothing. Companies owe you nothing. And so the onus is on you to make sure that you take care of your future. And so understanding stock markets, understanding how compounded interest works, understanding what your money can do for you, I think those are life skills that you need to start honing in on from a very, very young age.
Hi everybody, thank you very much for dialing into my video series called The Legend Within. Today's guest is Pillay, who is a CEO of an IT company out in South Africa. Ashley has a very interesting background that started off as an accountant to an executive sales leader at one of the enterprise software companies, and then now is CEO of an IT company in South Africa. And in today's session, we will be talking about leadership. We will be talking about the academics behind leadership and areas to focus on how to hone in on your craft and become more impactful and focus on people as well. So up and coming leaders, this is a great video for you. Thank you very much for watching.
Very much for having me on board. I'm excited about today and I look forward to our conversation.
Tell us a little bit about your background, right, and why you're here. You know, you've come from some really humble beginnings and you've really used that as a foundation and a platform for you to expose your skill sets and your drive and your grit for you to become where you are today. So tell us, how did that humble beginnings shape you into the person that you are today?
Yeah, great question, Rish. Thank you very much. So I grew up in a small town called Verulam in KZN, on the north coast of KZN. And we moved there when I think I was around 7 or 8 years old. And so I went to school there. It's a little town out there in KZN. And for the longest time, it was home, right? And so, you know, what's important about being in Verulam, though, is that, you know, one shouldn't romanticize poverty. And what I mean by that is that even though we came from humble beginnings and that kind of background, I knew that I wasn't, when I say I don't want to romanticize poverty, a place shouldn't define who you are. Right. But having said that, though, what was important for me and the learnings from coming from a small town like that is that it gave me a chance to stand out. And so we started the Verulam Youth League, strangely enough. And then in high school, I was one of the founding members of the SLC in the school that I went to. And so very early on, I started developing some leadership skills from those sort of activities that I was involved in. And with that came how to organize and how to create structure, right, and how to influence people to a certain extent. And so we started doing a lot of charity work around the youth club that we had built up. And I started to see myself in that leadership organizational role, if that makes sense. And I developed and honed in on that skill from there onwards.
You had a pretty interesting path just from a career perspective. You know, one of the first things you did was get into an accountant role and perform accounting for like some of the big companies in Johannesburg. And so how do you transition from like an accounting role into a sales leadership role and a CEO? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so when I left school, I joined another partner and we decided to start a bookkeeping business. And we were doing books for these small mums and pop stores around the town. And that evolved, and we started doing more books for larger businesses from the Durban Central area. And we did that for a long time. And we did what we VAT, income tax, payroll, and that sort of statutory kind of stuff. And so I had experience in accounting and bookkeeping. However, Verulam is only that small, right? And so I decided to move to Johannesburg, which is the South African Central Economic Hub. And I started working for a company called Prime Media as a bookkeeper, and it was great, you know, doing the normal stuff that bookkeepers do. But I knew inherently that I needed to achieve more, that I wanted to be more. And I also knew that, you know, I wanted to interact with a lot more people on a daily basis. And so I read this book, Jim Collins' Good to Great, and it changed my life. And as cliched as it may sound, I realized that I was just sitting on the wrong seat of the bus. The bus was moving, but I was on the wrong seat of the bus.
Right.
And so I applied for a job in sales at Sage. And they liked the idea that I had an accounting background. And they liked the fact that I could speak and sort of sell myself. And so I started my journey at Sage as a salesman.
That's very interesting. You know, a lot of people don't take that type of risk only because, you know, an accounting and bookkeeping role is, it can define a prolific and established path for one, right? Because it's still a good career to be in. And so taking that risk and kind of leaving that stability, if you will, for a sales role is a massive risk to take. And so what goes through your mind when you take a risk like that?
So a hell of a lot, hey? My daughter had just been born, and she was 1 at the time. And so I was thinking, wow, this is a big step for you to do. But I did it. I did it because I could see the potential of the sales role. Yes, there was comfort in being an accountant and a bookkeeper,
Right.
but I wanted more. And I was driven passionately about how I could get my brand out there, how I could make a difference. And I could see that sales was a key enabler in order for me to do that.
You've also grown pretty fast when you transition into a sales role, right? Because you've been handpicked specifically by your leaders for some big roles and leadership roles to manage a large amount of people. And so tell me, how do you set yourself up to be handpicked for those type of roles and grow the way you have?
First, I want to tell you a story to create some context in terms of how I became a better salesperson. So I was working as a normal salesperson. I think I was probably 6 months into the job. And my boss at the time, Tanya Miranda, calls me in and she says, listen, Ash, we don't like your attitude. And what I mean to say by that is that, you know, you come in here, you don't greet your team, you're quite arrogant, you're not very approachable, and I can only imagine how you are with customers. And she lambasted me for about 15 minutes and said to me, buddy, you need to pull up your socks. Rish, I walked out of that meeting with her, and the first person I went up to, and hi, how are you? My name is Ashley Pillay. I'm so pleased to meet you. And so I learned how to start engaging with people and how to bring down my own personal barriers and how to interact with people. That was the first step, right? Because I came out of the accounting background into a sales background where I was meant to be social, and I wasn't being social. And
Right.
so that was a big adjustment for me to make. And then when I closed the deal, I would stand on my soapbox and beat my chest and celebrate my success. And so leadership took notice of me. That was the first thing. The second thing is that when I was given a target within the sales environment, I never scoffed at the target. I always went, give it to me. I'll handle it. I'll make that number.
Right.
And so I did. And so if you look at my career within Sage, I think I missed a number once, 2014. But every single other year, I've been able to hit that number. And so people recognize when you're that successful. The other thing that I did was I never relied on other people. If there was a demo to be done, I went and created the POC and demoed it to the client. I loved doing that. And as I developed and I had a team underneath me or that worked with me, I started teaching them that you've got to lead from the front. And so that your leaders now recognize that you're putting in the effort.
Three things I take away from that, right? So number one, in terms of your personality and your interaction with other people, just like social acumen, would you say that you had to transition from being an introvert to an extrovert, or was it just a social skill that you had to build?
So inherently people are who people are. But yes, it is a social skill that you need to build. Very important though, I've never closed a deal on a golf course. I've never closed a deal in a restaurant or a bar. And so, you know, when one says one needs to be social, one needs to be social to a certain point, right? And I think there's misconception that you need to be sociable to the extent of being able to play golf
Right.
or be in a restaurant or a bar in order to be successful at sales. I don't necessarily think that's true anymore.
It's a matter of EQ, emotional intelligence, and it's the
Yeah.
ability to connect with one's emotions and one's personality, and also have intuition as well for the other person, right? Have intuition for how they're feeling, how they're observing, digesting, and receptive to things. The second thing you mentioned there was also around targets. The art of the possible, like, is essentially being able to define your own goals, not just your company goals, and being able to hit that. And there's massive drive and determination that goes beyond that, right? But also in some, I guess, in some frame, there must be a point in time where you define realistic versus unrealistic. And it sounds to me like there's nothing unrealistic in that case, in your experience.
So there's two things that I want to say about that statement is that, you know, when you work in corporate, there's two types. Well, in general, you have entrepreneurs that go and start up their own businesses. And then what corporate allows you to do, if you're in a sales environment, is to become that proverbial entrepreneur, right?
Right.
So you become a trader. You can write your own paycheck, right? And so what I loved about being in sales is that towards the end of the quarter, the management team would come to you and say, Ash, what have you got in your bag to help us out this month? And so you'd have to dig deep, make those calls, make sure that the relationships that you have with customers are going to be able to deliver on the promises that you made to management. And so, yeah, maybe it was, you stretched it a bit in terms of meeting that target, but you've got to push continuously.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, right? But one of the things that I'm picking up there from what you're saying, which kind of ties into the third thing you mentioned, which is around, continuously putting in every effort that you can, believing that you can get to the results, and also not relying on anybody, which helps you in most sales world start off strong. Because a lot of the time we see because we're fiscal operated in the sales world, we tend to leave everything for the 11th hour, right? And a lot of the sales cycles happen in the 11th hour. But when you adopt that grit, that determination, and that art of the possible, and also the not relying on anybody, as you mentioned, you kind of start strong and you build your foundation and you set up the stage for the rest of the year for a successful one to eventually achieve those results that were laid out for you. Can you talk a little bit about the last thing you mentioned, right? So obviously for the people that are watching it that don't understand what a POC is, that's a proof of concept. So essentially in your world, as you're selling solutions and technology, you have to prove it out in some instances for customers that want to use it and adopt it in a specific way. And so you've touched on a key thing there, right? Which is hands-on yourself, like jumping in and getting your hands dirty with every bit of effort to ensure the success of something like that. Like, I'd love you to just dive into that and share a little bit more about why do you operate like that, and why is that important?
So, Rich, the first thing I want to say about being in sales is that, historically, salespeople had a negative connotation attached to that particular field, right, or career. And so at a very early on, I made peace with the fact that I loved being in sales. And not because I wanted to, not because of the money, and yes, the money was great, but because I liked making a difference in other people's lives. And to take that a little bit further, when you're in ERP, what you're able to do is show someone true value of, if you have a proper income statement, balance sheet, trial balance, that can make a difference in terms of the decisions that you're making within your business. So that's the first thing. The second thing is about this whole leading from the front thing. If I'm not able to create a POC, a proof of concept, to the client, a show and tell, he's never going to buy the Kool-Aid, right? He's never going to believe what I'm selling him if I don't believe in it. And so I went to great lengths to understand the software that I was selling and the difference that it could make in that business environment. And so before each meeting, one, I would research that company. Two, I would create their inventory items within the software. I would create their GL structure within the software. And perhaps I'm getting a bit technical now. But that kind of mindset is what creates success. Is if you are prepared for any eventuality in terms of the questions that may come through from the audience or from the customer. The other thing about these days is that, it's no more just sales. Now it's about building rapport. Well, it's always been about building rapport, but your audience is a lot more informed now. he's got choices now, you know. And so you got to be the best at what you're doing. But added to that, you got to build a friend within that customer. And it's going back to building rapport. And so that's how you win in a sales environment.
There's a lot there that you just provided, and I'm going to try and dive into some of those key moments or key aspects that you described. Because what happens also from a leadership perspective sometimes is that as you jump in and you take over tasks to own them and execute upon them, it can be perceived as sidelining the individuals that should be responsible for it. But in your situation and in your story, you're saying that it's more of an example, because as a leader, if you're expecting your people to do something, you should be able to do it, number one. Number two, as you're doing it, you're creating a climate where people can observe and learn from as well, and create repeatable success patterns that they can continue to use, right? That's what I'm grabbing from there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's exactly it. You know, if you want people to really learn from you, show them the way, and show them the right way. And I believe that was part of the recipe to certainly my success. And those people in my sales teams that were successful, that's what they did as well.
Teaching how to fish, exactly, right?
How to fish, yeah.
And so going back to your career,
yeah,
you have this prolific career where you're a senior executive of sales, where you're managing a large group of people, you're creating leaders, you're leading by example in an international, well-known branded company, and then you leave to take a CEO position of a much smaller company. So tell us about that. Why does that happen, and what goes through your mind when it does happen?
So, Rish, I love being at Sage. I learned so much. I had great mentors at Sage. But like everything, one needs to either decide, do you want to continue within this path within your organization, or do you need something a little more? And my answer to your question is a little more complex than I just wanted to leave because I was bored or whatever it is.
Nice.
There's a couple of things here. The first thing is that I realized that my team and the role that I was in needed a different perspective. Sage was going through a transition. There was new leadership coming in, and so they wanted to run the business that they saw fit. And some of my ideas and views may have been contradiction to how they felt. And so I felt that it was necessary for me to move on. The second thing is that in terms of my sales career, whilst one makes a lot of cash through commissions, right, one doesn't necessarily build up wealth through equity. And so I wanted to be my own boss for a change. And so I was offered a wonderful opportunity here at Exponant. And I'll talk about, a little just now about the Exponant company. The third reason that I wanted to leave was that I started to realize that I was starting to become mundane. I was doing the same things over and over and over again. And so I registered myself at a business school here in Johannesburg, and that started to change my mind as well. And I started to go on this journey of learning again, and that excited me. And so all of those, the stars sort of aligned, and I moved to Exponant. Even though small organization, but I had a lot more flexibility in terms of how I could develop and grow the organization. So that in a nutshell is the reason that I left. And so when I arrived here at Exponant, the business has been going on for 20 years. And I realized, ooh, we've got a bit of an issue because, a lot of people say, no, Ash, when you walk into a business, it's either we've tried that, we're not that type of business. Nah, we don't fit into that type of culture. And so I had to deal with a lot of that. And then you have a lot of, I've got 20 years of experience. The hassle is that, is it 20 years of experience, or is it 1 year repeated 20 times? And so I found a lot of that. But there was a depth in terms of the IP, but IP in terms of how we did business previously. And what I want to do is mold that into how we want to do business going forward. And so when I walked into the organization, all I talk about is building a growth organization, building a learning organization. And that's the journey that I've been on for the last 2 years, Rish, here at Exponent, and I've loved every moment of it.
Super profound what you said about doing the same thing for 20 years versus having 20 years of experience, because a lot of the time that exists, especially when you're in a corporate organization in a well-known international company that has all the benefits that you enjoy, that you partake in, you tend to be in a specific level where it creates some element of stagnancy and you just don't go outside that zone, but you have some appreciation for a definition of growth only because you're selling to different customers, you're talking to different people, and you're learning processes even more and more as you go along. But then there's that real key moment where you get outside your comfort zone into the uncomfort zone and just build all those muscles for you to do different things. For example, you're probably responsible now for human resources, operations, supply chain. Like there's a whole plethora of elements to your business organization that you have to oversee the success of, and then adopt that growth DNA that you've just described in every one of those areas, not just sales. So I'd love to know where you see your organization going as a CEO, where you see yourself going as a CEO in the next few years. Like what defines success for you?
So the easy answer is to say, oh, well, I want a double turnover. I want to list the organization on the JSE, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. That's the easy answer. But no, that's not what I'm aiming at. Rish, we run internship programs with Vodacom here in South Africa. And so we bring young kids out of university and we mentor them and we put them into those internship programs. I want to start doing more and more of that kind of stuff, right, for a bigger audience. I want to make a difference in this IT space. I believe that in Africa, we're spending far too much money on IT, right? We're spending the GDP of some countries in a province to get their IT systems up and going. And so I want to make IT affordable for schools, for government, for anyone that wants to have access to technology. And I think that's one of the biggest inhibitions we have to growth in our economy, in our country, is that not enough people have access to IT. And there's different facets of IT, right? There's connectivity, there's telco, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that's where I want to make a difference. I want to position Exponant as that go-to ICT company that's known for their value for money, and known for their honesty, and known for their integrity. And that's how I want to position our organization.
Our viewers that are listening in and watching, that want to hone in on their craft and just become better leaders, what is the advice you have for them?
So, Rish, I think we use the word leadership quite loosely these days, and it worries me. And I mentioned to you this previously, is that you've got different types of leadership, right? I think if you can stand up in front of a crowd and have that crowd move in a certain direction, that's leadership. But I think if you want to be in a business leadership environment, it takes a totally different set of skills. I've coined this new phrase in my mind that I'm playing with, called visceral leadership. And I think there's just too much of that going on, and not enough academic leadership going on. And what I mean by that is that not many people are honing in on that skill of leadership by studying for it, by going to business school and developing on their leadership ability. And we certainly need more of that in Africa, where people need to go and academically apply themselves to leadership. If you don't understand things like Porter's 5 forces, if you don't understand what's going to differentiate your company from another, you might get business right some of the time, but you're not going to get business right all of the time. And so that's what I want the takeaway to be here. That if you want to be successful in business, you've got to be feeding your mind with information and the right information, and surrounding yourself with the right people, people that make your life better, that are positively influencing you, and that are bringing out the best in you. And that's the only way you're going to succeed. The other thing that I want to say is that if you're in a sales role, the other reason that you need to understand business and math and accounting is because of your comms, right? You know, no one's going to take care of you. And you need to understand how you're being paid and how you're going to spend that money.
Right.
It's important to note that when my dad was growing up, or when my dad retired, he got a pension fund or a provident fund or whatever the case may be. And so for a long time, we expected companies to take care of us. Today, we C2C, cost to company.
Right.
You're a cost to company. I mean, let that settle for a moment.
Right.
They owe you nothing. Companies owe you nothing. And so the onus is on you to make sure that you take care of your future. And so understanding stock markets, understanding how compounded interest works, understanding what your money can do for you, I think those are life skills that you need to start honing in on from a very, very young age. Those are sort of the two takeaways that I want to leave the audience with. The third thing that I want to leave them with is, man, do what you love. And as cliched as that may sound, if it's sales, do sales. There's this misnomer, though, that there needs to be a work-life balance. And I may be cynical, but I've never heard anyone refer to Steve Jobs as having a great work-life balance, or Elon Musk as having a great work-life balance. And so if you're going to make a success of your career, it is dedication, it is the late nights, it is the early mornings. You're going to have to be at the grindstone, man, because nothing's going to be given to you for free without hard work.
And so you talk a lot about the academic leadership there, right? And I think those elements are super important to craft and stand out and brand yourself, be the front of the line, make the difference. If you want to elevate your career, I think those elements are important as well. And I so agree with you on that. Can you elaborate a little bit about the visceral leadership that you mentioned?
So I think that a lot of today we talk when I talk about visceral leadership, it's a feeling thing. So we feel that Ashley is a good leader, but does Ashley necessarily have the academic backing? He may have the charisma, he may have the ability to evangelize people, but can he make the right decision in terms of business, whether to acquire another organization? Can he read a balance sheet, income statement, trial balance? Can he go to the bank and have a meaningful conversation with them about an overdraft facility? And so if you really want to be a leader and you really want to run your own business, those things are crucial. Those things are absolutely crucial. It's important to understand debits and credits. And that accounting field, I think, will always be important to business, because you need to understand that the money in the bank may not necessarily mean that your company is profitable. And that's what I mean by visceral leadership, is that far too often, just because someone can stand up there and convince you of a thought, doesn't necessarily make them a great leader in a business context. You know, we've got the street smarts, right? We come from the hood. The hood. It's a lot less gangster than I make it sound. But we come from that background where we had no choice but to develop street smarts. And so if you're able to manage and marry the street smarts with academia, it's a winning formula, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. How are you leading effectively during these times, Ashley?
So, I mean, COVID's affected us all. In South Africa, we have something called essential services. And so because we provide essential services in the IT field to many of our customers, we're allowed to trade and do business. But Microsoft Teams has been a godsend. And so I reach out and touch. I've got 5 direct reports that report directly to me. So we each other touch each other every morning to make sure that we know what the day holds. They have got reports underneath them that with supervisors that reach out and touch them. And so we've got this cascading sort of a business model during COVID, right? Yeah, so we do, the new way is Teams, right? We're doing a lot of stuff around with Teams and the Power Apps within the Office 365 space. We're doing a lot of stuff around that. So yeah, for us, it's business as usual, pretty much, because of tech, right? And it's unfortunate some businesses aren't as tech savvy as we are. We happen to be there because we're a tech company. And so we try to evangelize people about 365, about the Microsoft stack, and how they can benefit from it. Strangely enough, some people are still not sure about how to connect. And yeah, we try to help people with that journey.
What is it you want to be known for?
Well, Arish, I just want to be known for being a good dad. I want to be known for having empathy towards my fellow human beings. I want to be known for the guy that you were able to go and have a chat with about whatever, right? I want to be known for the guy that was generous. You could have a laugh with. I want to be known for a guy who employed, and at the moment we employed 277 people. I want to be known for that guy who kept 277 people employed during probably the most tumultuous economic period in our lifetime. And if I can do that, if we can keep our people gainfully employed during this time, yay, and I want to be known as a leader that built a company that will live on for generations to come.
That's very impressive. Thank you very much for sharing that, Ashley. I appreciate you being here today. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope everybody watching enjoyed it as much as I did. How can people find you?
Rish, I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter. I'm making a lot of noise about government and how they're spending their money at the moment. So guys, follow me on Twitter. Rish, absolute pleasure catching up with you.
Yes.
And thank you for the opportunity. I am humbled. Well done to you on this great initiative.